go down the list a little bit more. So, is there another outlier for more than 8 weeks that you can think of? I can only think of one, maybe.
Um, what do you think about sweet potato slips if you're starting those
Oh,
indoors?
that's a whole different class. That's a whole different class. I mean, that's like that's yeah. Okay. Um, yeah,
I'd say, from my experience, eggplants, they seem to be very slow,
yeah.
very similar to peppers in how slow they are, both to come up and then to actually put on some real growth.
Yeah, that
So
was
I'm
the
going to say
other
they're in the
outlier.
8 weeks bucket.
Yeah, I don't think that they are an outlier because they take a long time to germinate like peppers do. Um, I think, like you said, they're just slow and it's
Hmm.
incredibly frustrating to grow
Well, you know
them.
what? Let's piggyback off. Let's go back a second.
Okay.
So peppers are so much earlier than these other crops. I think it's a mixed bag. Some peppers, sweets, I find germinate, 7, 10, maybe 11, 12 days. Hot peppers can take 3 weeks to germinate,
Yeah.
right? And then in both instances, once you get those true leaves, so you're not in the cotyledon stage. We're just going to keep on saying that wrong if it's wrong. You're past the point of those first two leaves that come up. The next sets of leaves and the sets of leaves after that are just slower, it seems, for peppers. So that's why, like, I feel really good about a 12-week head start for them. And I do believe the same idea of for the eggplant, if you're starting those, so slow to really kind of produce a sizable plant. And
Yeah.
that also depends on what size you want your plants to go into the garden at. So you kind of have to balance that. And this is one of those things where experience is going to be your teacher there.
Yeah.
I've put peppers in the garden that have 3 true leaves, 4 true leaves, and I put peppers in the garden that, it's already 2 feet tall,
Yeah.
you know.
Well, and I'll say this too, as we get through this, all the way up until we get to the 1 month plants, all of these plants can benefit from an up potting one time.
Hmm.
I'm a big proponent of one time, not, you know,
Excellent point. Yeah.
keep going, but up until the 1 month section. And then, obviously you get your tomatoes. So
Hmm.
tomatoes are obviously 8 weeks. And
Hmm.
I'm pretty
Agreed.
solid on the 8 weeks on that. I don't think they need much more than that. Um, what about anything else that's 8 weeks for you?
So tomatoes, I think it's important because tomatoes are one of those that, if you go beyond or longer than 8 weeks, they can really outgrow your growing area and be more of a nuisance than
Yeah.
than you really want to deal with. So I think that's a sweet spot for tomatoes. Yeah. So 8 weeks. I mean, I think that you're always asking me for pushing me for one more, and then it's the one more you don't want. So I think some of the herbs, you know, I think some of the herbs like your basil, obviously you can direct sow basil as well.
Yeah.
But that's a good example of something that I'd be starting somewhere close to my tomato, so closer to 8 weeks.
Yeah, I think herbs are, especially like you said, basil. I can tell you that with basil, so until we started packaging seeds to sell, link below, um, I I had forgotten that they're basically dust. And
Hmm.
one year I
Hmm.
poured them all into, I mean, they just kind of like came out and they came into one seed cell tray, a whole packet of them. And what I ended up doing is just letting them grow. And then I would take them and pick off pieces, and each piece would have like 10 plants in it from the
Hmm.
seed cell. And then I started more from that and they did great. I mean, it was really easy. So yeah, um, I think that's a good one. And really, when it gets into it too, you can start looking at stuff like okra. It's definitely not 8 weeks, but that's like a weird bridge one where
Hmm.
6 weeks to 4 weeks
Hmm.
maybe, and even a great direct sow candidate on top of
Yeah.
that.
Yeah.
And a lot of the 4 week plants are all going to be direct sow candidates as well. So, and when I say candidates, it's not like you could do it. It's like you're almost just as good to do it as you are to start it inside, depending on what you want.
I think your growing area challenges you may have had in prior years really dictates what makes sense, your schedule, how much time you have now versus later. So if it's your first time planting these things, starting these things, I say give it a go and start them indoors. But also, if you have room, direct sow some things and see which plants do better. I know that's something we commonly say. I believe, generally speaking, a plant that has started in the soil directly where it's going to grow is going to perform better than something that's introduced to the soil. It has less work to do to acclimate because, again, it was born there, right? But the conditions that we're gardening in don't always make that the easiest route,
Right.
right? So for me in particular, a good example is a melon, any melon plants, right? Those are your 4 week kids. And what I found is I have trouble getting things to, once they've germinated, live past those first couple of cotyledon leaves and really kind of produce. And remember, I'm also coming from a place where I have other things growing in the garden at that time.
Right.
So for me, it's easier for me to take a plant. I know what it is. I've started from seed indoors and then transplant that in.
Right.
That's the best version of me.
Yeah, I agree
When
with
I
you.
say that, that means I don't always do
So I
it.
agree with you that direct sowed plants will typically do better. The question really becomes is that plant have enough time to do what it wants to do in order to give yourself the appropriate harvest for your garden? Okra is a really fast grower and it's a heavy producer. I mean, it produces very heavy, so that's absolutely one. But like a tomato, you can absolutely direct sow anything, but a tomato takes a long time. Yes, Batavia.
I wish that we could just push a replay button. Is it going to have enough time to do what it needs to do in the garden? Paraphrasing what you just said. That's so critical across the board.
Yeah.
Across the board. Does it have enough time to produce in the best version of itself? Broccoli in the spring, we've talked about that. We didn't say that directly, but that's what we're talking about. The reason why many people in the Midwest aren't direct sowing tomatoes is because if you look at an 8-week growing period, if you have 8 weeks from May 1st, I may not have time to really get the full production.
Yeah.
If I'm in, let's say, May, June, July, my plant is finally getting to the same size outdoors, maybe a little bit bigger than it would have been if I would have planted it directly 2 months prior. So I'm in July 1st and I'm just getting to a 1.5 foot tomato plant.
Yeah.
I only have July, August, September really for that plant to produce. So I'm just going to get a head start. And that's the reason why I'm starting something like a tomato indoors.
Absolutely. I mean, same with peppers. I mean, I mean, how many times have you let something just sit on the ground or on the plant, it falls, and then you get volunteers, and they absolutely will grow, but it takes I mean, imagine an eggplant, my God, you'd have to wait 2 years for it to finally do anything after it comes out of the cold. I mean, it's ridiculous.